Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And tonight's topics are Scott Ritter on a new strategic balance, and Pepe Escobar / Michael Hudson on Gaza Genocide, on the origins of the Gaza Genocide. So, last night I went over a piece by Scott Ritter that emphasized the new balance. Hey, Kay, how are you doing? It emphasized the new deterrence balance between Iran and Israel because of the successes. Iran had demonstrated in its retaliation, against Israel. It had shown that it could beat, the Iron Dome. Of course, the Israelis were emphasizing what they considered to be their great success in actually knocking down what they said was 99% of the flying objects that was sent to them from Iran. Honey, please hand me the calculator. Okay. So there was supposed to be 350 such objects. And according to Scott Ritter, and there's disagreement on how many hits there were, but according to him, there were 9 hits. There were 9 hits out of the 350. So that means I'm going to do this the other way. 341 out of 350 Israeli successes. That comes to not 99%, but 97.44% success rate. Now, it might be silly to try to compute, these numbers, because it's not so much about, the numbers, it's about the 9 successes, that Iran had. They had these successes with hits on the Israeli targets that they had especially picked out, specifically targets on the Nevatim air base. Some also say targets on the Ramon air base, and then also targets also they targeted an intelligence gathering base that was in the Golan Heights. All 3 of these bases were supposed to have had a part in the raid on Iran, specifically the destruction of the consulate in Syria. So they were targeted for retaliation, specifically this Okay, I had an interruption in my signal that I've been trying to fix, and now it looks like it's an uncertain signal, okay, as well. Okay, but it is there. I'm doing the best I can do with this signal. It's gotten firm now, so that's all right. But what I was about to say is they targeted also an intelligence gathering base. Uh, okay, that was in the Golan Heights to strike, and they struck them successfully. So what they showed is that they could get through the Iron Dome, okay, defenses. But it wasn't only the Iron Dome defenses. There were other defenses that were at play here. The so-called Arrow 1 defense, the Arrow 2 defense, also David's sling, and also there was one other I'm forgetting, okay, at this point. There were 5 different defensive systems the Iranians had to breach. They constructed a test, okay, for the West. And the test was very disadvantageous to them. That is to say, they gave more than fair warning to the rest, hours and hours of notice they were going to attack. Okay, so they telegraphed, okay, the whole thing, and Western radars were able to pick up the start of the attack and follow it along. So ostensibly, they had all the information they needed to totally block the attack. And yet, in spite of the technological superiority of their air defense, they could not stop the 9 hits. Some say there were 12 hits. Some say there were 7 hits. The important thing is big bombs got through, and the bases sustained what was probably heavy damage. We don't know how heavy the damage was because Israelis won't let the reporters in to see what the damage was at these bases. So we don't actually know, but we can infer from the fact that they won't let reporters in to take photos that there was serious damage. So it seems as though the Iranians proved that they could beat the Israeli defenses with a 350 object, attack. Now, the majority of the objects, or close to a majority of the objects anyway, were drones. They were not the latest drones. They were not the latest drones, of Iran from a technical point of view. They were old drones that, in fact, were not being used in combat anymore. They basically threw them up as junk to confuse the system. There were also 30 cruise missiles, and the rest were ballistic missiles. The 3 layers of offense hit a defense that was largely successful, as I just said, 97.5% successful, but still not successful enough because damaging ballistic missiles got through there. Now, since Iran has the capability to throw 3,500 objects at Israel at once, and perhaps even 35,000 objects at Israel at once, it was clear to most observers, and analysts, that Iran had strategic deterrence with respect to Israel because they had proved that they had the capacity to beat the Iron Dome system that the Israelis rely on so heavily. So Scott wrote about that in detail last night. We went over his article. But then he came back with another article, okay, today, okay, as of today, and it's that article that we're going to go over now. That article is very significant because it generalizes the reasoning he presented in the first article to argue that the strategic balance between Iran and Israel had changed. So let me put up this new piece by Scott, which he put out seemingly overnight. Some of the small typo errors in it kind of reflected that he, did something overnight, but still, okay, it's a pretty good piece. So let me get this out of the way. Okay, there's a picture of missiles, okay, leaving Iran. And those are ballistic missiles, of course. Oh, this was North Korea conducting a mass launch, okay, of its ballistic missiles. The article begins, the Iranian defeat of the U.S.-Israeli missile defense architecture has global security consequences. The world's attention has, rightfully so, been focused on the fallout from Iran's retaliatory strike against Israel on April 13th to 14th, 2024. Okay, an earlier version I had of this post said April 13th to 14th, 2023. That was one of the small errors in the post. Corrected now. There are probably other small errors that are corrected as well. Iran's purpose in launching the attack was to establish a deterrence posture designed to put Israel and the United States on notice that any attack against Iran, whether on Iranian soil or on the territory of other nations, would trigger a retaliation which would inflict more damage on the attacker than the attacker could hope to inflict on Iran. To achieve this result, Iran had to prove itself capable of overcoming the ballistic missile defense systems of both Israel and the United States, which were deployed in and around Israel at the time, okay, of the attack. So here we have to add a comment. For weeks now, the United States, okay, has been on alert, okay, in the area. It has 2 aircraft carriers, okay, in the area, and lots of other naval ships, okay, as well. That won't always be the case, not unless this crisis continues forever. Okay. So it was possible for the United States to help Israel right now due to the crisis in the area. But if the crisis were ever to go away, or a lot of those ships had to go home to refuel, okay, then the United States help for Israel would be less. Just had to point that out. This Iran was able to accomplish with at least 9 missiles, striking 2 Israeli air bases that fell under the protective umbrella of the Israeli-U.S. defense shield, missile defense shield. The Iranian deterrence posture has implications that reach far beyond the environs of Israel or the Middle East. By defeating the U.S. Israeli missile defense shield, Iran exposed the notion of U.S. missile defense supremacy that serves as the heart of U.S. force protection models used when projecting military power on a global scale. The U.S. defensive posture vis-a-vis Russia, China, and North Korea hinges on assumptions made regarding the efficacy of U.S. ballistic missile defense capabilities. by successfully attacking Israeli air bases, which had the benefit of the full range of U.S. anti-ballistic missile technology. Iran exposed the vulnerability of the U.S. missile defense shield to modern missile technologies involving maneuverable warheads, decoys, and hypersonic speed. Oh, by the way, it's become clear to many, that Iran did not use hypersonic missiles this time. And they still got the 9 ballistic missiles through. Going on. U.S. bases in Turkey, the Pacific, and the Middle East, once thought to be well protected, have suddenly been revealed to be vulnerable to hostile attack. So too are U.S. Navy ships operating at sea. I have to add here, though, of course, not the Polaris missile submarines, but the surface ships. Israel's ballistic missile defenses were given a supercharged boost by the deployment of advanced capital AN/TPY-2 X-band radar on Israeli soil. The radar, operated by the U.S. Army's 13th Missile Defense Battery, is located on Har Keren, a height which rises out of the Negev Desert near the city of Beersheba. The AN/TPY-2 is a missile defense radar that can detect, track, and discriminate ballistic missiles, discriminating between threats and non-threats, i.e. incoming missiles and space debris. The AN/TPY-2 operates in 2 different modes. The first, known as the forward-based mode, quote unquote, detects and tracks ballistic missiles as they are launched. The second, quote, terminal mode, unquote, is used to guide interceptors toward a descending missile. The AN-TPY-2, I should say the AN/TPY-2, is optimized to work with the terminal high altitude area defense, that is THAAD or THAAD, a ballistic missile defense, by guiding the THAAD missile to its target. The U.S. had deployed at least 1 and possibly 2 THAAD missile batteries to Israel at the time of the Iranian missile attack. In addition to assisting the THAAD missiles in shooting down incoming threats, the AN/TPY-2 radar data was integrated with Israeli radar data and other technical intelligence collected by the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization's BMDO network of early warning satellites deployed for the sole purpose of monitoring and reporting Iranian ballistic missile launches. This integrated early warning surveillance tracking system was tied into a multi-layered missile defense architecture, which included the U.S. THAAD and the Israeli Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 advanced Patriot and David Sling anti-ballistic missile interceptor systems. So how many of you had the impression that the Israeli air defense or the U.S. air defenses were so complex, so multi-layered, so integrated, and so complex, and that also they involved so many missiles themselves? Going on, adding to the capability and lethality of U.S. Israeli ballistic missile defense architecture was the presence of at least 2 U.S. Navy ballistic missile defense BMD system capable Aegis class destroyers. Those are naval ships equipped with the SPY-1 S-band radar and SM-3, SM-6 interceptor missiles. The Navy BMD-capable ships are configured to tie into the ground-based ANTPY-2X band radar, as well as the broader BMD system through the command and control, battle management, and communications C2BMC system. The combination of ground-based radars and interceptors with the U.S. Navy BMD system provides U.S. military commanders with theater-wide protection from holistic ballistic missile threats. This integrated system is designed to detect, acquire, and track incoming targets, and using computer-driven algorithms, discriminate targets and destroy them using hit-to-kill kinetic warheads, i.e., quote, bullet hitting a bullet, unquote. On April 13th to 14th, 2023, here was the 2023 era. So it might be this hasn't gone through a correction yet. On April 13th to 14th, 2024, obviously, this system had failed. In short, the combination of U.S. and Israeli anti-ballistic missile defense capabilities deployed in and around the Negev Desert made the Israeli air bases located there the most protected locations in the world from threats posed by ballistic missiles. And yet, Iran successfully struck both locations with multiple missiles. The global strategic implications of this stunning Iranian accomplishment are game-changing. I hope you all can see that, how game-changing they are. When Scott describes or lays out the complexity of the ABM system, the complexity of the Iron Dome and all the other components of the system, and you realize, that Iran broke through that 9 times, multiple missiles, this conclusion, specifically, the global strategic implications of this stunning Iranian accomplishment are game-changing. You realize that that statement is true. The U.S. has long struggled conceptually with the notion of what is referred to as, quote, A2/AD, unquote, anti-access / area denial. That's what A2/AD means. Threats posed by hostile ballistic missiles. However, the U.S. had sought to mitigate against this A2 threat by overlaying theater ballistic missile defense architecture like that had been employed in Israel. The failure of the combined U.S.-Israeli defense systems in the face of a concerted Iranian missile attack exposed the shortcomings of the U.S. ballistic missile defense capabilities worldwide. And here, I have to emphasize, along with what I'm sure Scott would have said if he wanted a longer article here, we all have to realize that the Iranian capabilities to orchestrate, a missile attack in terms of numbers of missiles and the complexity of the attack are much greater than the 350 object attack they just gave to Israel. That didn't involve their hypersonic missiles. That involved the relatively few ballistic missiles. It was relatively inexpensive, for Iran. By the way, in the earlier article by Scott, he emphasized that the defense effort, by the Israelis alone involved an expenditure of $1.3 billion worth of missiles to try to thwart, the attack. In contrast, the ballistic missiles and the drones and the cruise missiles, of the Iranians, at most cost a few million. So from the standpoint of the economy of attack also, This is a stunning success, okay, for the Iranians. There's no doubt, okay, that they can multiply the 350 object attack by 10 and perhaps even by 100 and not feel it in relation to their stock of missiles. Uh, in short, Scott says, this means that the US and NATO forces in Europe are vulnerable to attack from advanced Russian missile technologies which match or exceed those used by Iran to attack Israel. It also means that China would most likely be able to strike and sink U.S. Navy ships in the Pacific Ocean in the event of a conflict over Taiwan, and that North Korea could do the same to U.S. ships and forces ashore in the vicinity of Japan and South Korea. That is such a key paragraph. I'm going to read it again. In short, this means that the US and NATO forces in Europe are vulnerable to attack from advanced Russian missile technologies, which match or exceed those used by Iran to attack Israel. It also means that China would most likely be able to strike and sink US Navy ships in the Pacific Ocean in the event of a conflict over Taiwan, and that North Korea could do the same to US ships and forces ashore in the vicinity of Japan and South Korea. Note that the reason why these various nations can all strike, okay, at American interests and make those assets vulnerable is because Russia spread the hypersonic missile technologies, okay, to China, okay, to North Korea, okay, and also to Iran. They developed those technologies in 2016 or 2017, and the years since then, they've been busy distributing them to their allies, trusting their allies enough to help them get these hypersonic technologies. Meanwhile, the United States has just finished a successful test of its own hypersonic missiles, but as far as I know, these are not in production yet. Scott, going on with what Scott has to say, the last paragraph, very significant. Until which time the U.S. can develop, produce, and deploy missile defense systems capable of defeating the new missile technology being deployed by nations like Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea, U.S. military power projection capabilities are in a state of checkmate by America's potential adversaries. And of course, the title of this post by Scott was Checkmate. By Scott Ritter, April 16th, 2024, from ScottRitterExtra.com. So, when you think about it, the extension from the success of Iran to the idea that all the powers mentioned have those capabilities is a fairly obvious kind of extension. Scott arrived at it very, very rapidly and published it overnight. He published it as of April 16th. So he got the thought, okay, and immediately laid it out. It was reliant, of course, on his own technical knowledge of what the anti-ballistic missile systems are about. And he went through a detailed explanation for us of what the various components of the ABM systems, the air defense systems that Israel, okay, and the United States had and deployed. In giving us the technical details, he made us understand how capable the air defense systems actually were. And that in spite of the great capability of this particular system, and in spite of the warning given to them by Iran, in spite of the fact they were able to get all their ships into position in order to thwart, the attack, and in spite of the fact that their radars were seeing the attack from beginning to end, they still could not completely thwart, the attack. So Scott drew out the implications for us, but there are further implications. One further implication is that basically the technology of flying objects, of rockets and drones and cruise missiles, and also ballistic missiles, has now outrun the anti-missile defense, technology. It's now more powerful than anti-ballistic missile technology. Now, we're pretty good at the new missile technology ourselves, I think. I think the United States is highly capable in that area. But whether our capabilities are the equal of Russian capabilities, Chinese capabilities, or even Iranian capabilities, I do not know. Anyway, our capabilities, in terms of the mass of those capabilities, would probably have to be deployed from the United States. They're not all stationed over in Europe or in West Asia. There's considerable capability sitting there, I'm sure. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that there's not even necessarily a balance of terror deterrence involved here with respect to the flying objects category, of offense. It may be that right at the moment, the BRICS nations, I'll just characterize them as the BRICS nations for talking about them here, it may be that, the BRICS nations have a balance of terror advantage over the United States and the collective West at this point. And that's, I think, a very heavy conclusion, to draw. So, our missile defenses will no longer work, and our missile offenses very well may not be the equal of those of the Russians and Chinese and the Iranians and now the North Koreans, which means we maybe should be dismantling our foreign bases and bringing them home, bringing our people home, out of harm's way, becoming concerned with our own security here at home. When I say being concerned with our own security here at home, I'm not only talking about trying to add to our defensive technologies or to our offensive technologies to match or exceed, our opponents. Because it's obvious, to me anyway, that over a period of time, both parties have collaborated in hollowing out the industrial capability, of this country, so that when it comes to defense technology or simply defense production, we cannot match the manufacturing capabilities of China, and Russia, and also North Korea, and Iran. That in the defense production area, they seem to have manufacturing capabilities that are greater than we have at this time. We also have to notice that for a country to be fully capable in defense manufacturing capability. It also has to be capable in manufacturing capability in general. And there's no doubt in this respect that we've fallen behind China, certainly. We have to tend to our knitting at home. We have to rebuild our industrial base here. We have to raise our productivity in the broad sense of that term, not in terms of the output per labor hour. You have to increase our productivity in terms of the kinds of products we can turn out, the end results, the variations in those particular products. We have to look more to our own self-sufficiency in this respect, as Russia and China and North Korea to some extent have looked to theirs. And also we have to develop very tight alliances with other nations that can supplement our capability in all of these areas. We have a lot of work to do. We're not the superpower anymore. Those days are gone. Now we have to rebuild. We have to rebuild at home. We have to use all of our talents. Our talents, are many, the talents of our people. We have to integrate all of our people into our economic system. And we have to reorient our economic system so that the FIRE sector, the finance, insurance, real estate sector is much less important. And the other productive sectors of our economy, the manufacturing sectors, the healthcare sectors, are much more productive, give us much more bang for the buck, and involve many more people. We have to become a creative society once again, as we once were. And that has to start right now, in my view. So, I'll now move to our second topic for tonight. Stop sharing this. And Kay says, where is everybody? I don't know. Ali Kish says, hi, checking out the scene. I think there are probably a lot of people watching, or some people watching on Twitter. Looks like there are only 2 people here, all from YouTube, but there are another 8 people here who don't come into the contents because they're probably watching on Twitter. But also, I have forgotten to share this on Facebook, and that might be a reason why we're not seeing more people here. So I will make sure that it is shared on Facebook right now. There are 32 people watching this on Facebook that haven't commented yet. Will come into the discussion. So that's what's going on. So, Ali Kish says hi, checking out the scene. K Ron says hi, Ali. How about we build up manufacturing instead of war related stuff? He says exactly. There's no creativity, okay, in this land. There, okay, is zero innovation. I wouldn't say that, but we're not seeing the kind of innovation we're seeing, okay, in China. Okay, so Ali Kish says good article. I dig it. Time to move to our second article, though, and that is was featured, okay, at unz.com, which is an aggregation site. It was uh, okay. It was originally published at the Strategic Culture Foundation, okay, in Russia, and the piece, of course, is by Pepe Escobar, uh, who narrates basically things that Michael Hudson told him. The title is "The Gaza Genocide as Explicit Policy." Michael Hudson names all names. Was published by Pepe on April 15th, 2024 at the Strategic Culture Foundation and published here on April 15th. Here, by here, I mean okay, at the unz.com site, which is a very good and comprehensive review site. Why am I sharing the article from this site rather than from the Strategic Culture site? Because the Strategic Culture site is not welcome on Facebook. That's why. And I would be penalized if I were to share it. If I were to share it to Facebook from that site. So here, of course, is a picture of Gaza and the devastation wrought there by the so-called Israeli defense forces. Some defense forces. The caption is Israel, Gaza, and West Bank should be seen as an opening of the new Cold War. In what doesn't look like a Cold War, much of a Cold War, does it? What can be considered the most crucial podcast of 2024 so far? And the podcast is one, okay, from Anya K. Okay, who's a podcaster out, okay, of Poland, and who frequently does very, very good interviews of Scott Ritter, okay, and some other people, but who in this case was interviewing Professor Michael Hudson, the author of seminal works such as Super Imperialism and the recent, okay, the collapse, okay, of antiquity. Michael Hudson has more books, well researched, okay, than you can shake a stick at. He's a university professor at the University of Missouri at Kansas City. He must have written 40 books by now. He's absolutely prolific. Super Imperialism has been a very important book since it first came out in the 1970s. For nearly 50 years, it's gone through revisions and changes, okay, over the years. And I think the latest version is now 4 or 5 years old. Okay, The Collapse of Antiquity is about perhaps 2 years old now, but it's an extremely important book. Clinically lays down the essential background to understand the unthinkable. 21st century genocide broadcast live 24/7 to the whole planet. So an email exchange, Professor Hudson, that is an email exchange with Pepe Escobar, because Pepe and Michael are very close. Detailed, he's now essentially, quote, spilling the beans, unquote, about how, quote, 50 years ago, when I worked at the Hudson Institute with Herman Kahn, who was the model for Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. Yes, he was. Israeli Mossad members were being trained including a guy by the name of Uzi Arad. And this gentleman was named after a submachine gun, the Uzi submachine gun, or maybe that's just his nickname. I don't know. I made 2 international trips with him, and he outlined to me pretty much what has happened today. He became head of Mossad and is now Netanyahu's advisor, unquote. That was a quote from Michael. By the way, I should add that Michael is not only a prolific writer about the history of things and a great analyst of international relations, but he also is an MMT economist, which is not widely known, but known to people who have known him at UMKC, which used to be the center of MMT work. Okay, in the United States, it no longer is because MMT is more dispersed now. Still a very important center, but it's dispersed to other areas now. There's a very important center, okay, in New York because MMT is taught at Stony Brook now, at Bard College, and also at the New University as well. Professor Hudson shows how quote the basic Gaza plan is how Khan designed the Vietnam War's division into sectors with canals cutting off each village, as the Israelis are doing to Palestinians. Also, already at that time, Khan pinpointed Balochistan as the area to foment disruption in Iran, okay, and the rest of the region. The reason for that, okay, is that area, specifically Balochistan, stretches out over 3 countries. Okay, one is Iran, and there's Pakistan, okay, and Afghanistan. So insurgents operating in one area can seek refuge, okay, in one of the other nations. Okay, so it's not by accident that Balochistan has been CIA jewel territory for decades, and recently with the added incentive of the disruption by any means necessary of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, a key connectivity node of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. Professor Hudson then connects the major dots. Quote, as I understand it, what the U.S. is doing with Israel is a dress rehearsal for it to move on to Iran and the South China Sea. As you know, there is no plan B in American strategy for very good reason. If anyone criticizes plan A, they're considered not to be a team player or even Putin's puppet. So critics have to leave when they see that they won't be promoted. That's why U.S. strategists won't stop and rethink what they're doing, unquote. Well, I think that paragraph, okay, is very pregnant, and it has suggestions, it has implications for the presidential elections as well. Because whether Biden wins or whether Trump wins, whichever member of the duopoly wins, the same players or players who very much agree with each other will be running foreign policy for the United States. In Trump's first term, he wasn't able to disturb that. All he did was appoint people who were neocons but were Republicans. When Biden came in, he appointed members of the neocon communities that were Democrats. The Hillary neocons are the ones he appointed. Okay? One might say the people who Trump appointed were more likely members of the Dick Cheney school, okay, of neocons. I think that's a good way to characterize them. So you can choose between the Dick Cheney neocons or the Hillary Clinton neocons, okay, if you're going to see to it that a president, either of the Republican or the Democratic Party, gets in here. But you won't change things unless some third party person gets in here. Okay? Because you need someone who, when he hears criticism, will not think about that person. Well, they're not going to be promoted because they're not a team player. You need to have a presidency that is open, okay, to criticism. You need to have a presidency whose president is open to criticism, who will reevaluate their strategy constantly as it's moving forward. So we will not see the rigidity in foreign policy we have seen for so many years. Okay, going on with Pepe's article. Isolate them in strategic hamlets, then kill them. In our email exchange, Professor Hudson remarked, quote, this is basically what I said, unquote, in reference to the podcast, okay, with Anya K. Drawing on his notes. Here is the full revised transcript, and there's a link to the full revised transcript here. I won't go over the full revised transcript. Pepe goes on, fasten your seatbelts. Unvarnished truth is more lethal than a hypersonic missile hit on the Zionist military strategy in Gaza. Quote, my background in the 1970s at Hudson Institute with Uzi Arad and other Mossad trainees, my field was BOP. I must say, I'm not sure, okay, what BOP is. Maybe somebody else can enlighten me on that. But I sat in on many meetings discussing military strategy. And I flew to Asia twice with Uzi and got to know him, says Michael Hudson. The U.S./Israeli strategy in Gaza is based in many ways on Herman Kahn's plan that was carried out in Vietnam in the 1960s. Herman's focus was systems analysis. Start by defining the overall aim, and then how do we achieve it? First, isolate them in strategic hamlets. Gaza has been carved up into districts, requiring electronic passes for entry from one sector to another or into Jewish Israel to work. First thing, kill them, ideally by bombing, because that will minimize domestic casualties for your army. The genocide we are seeing today is the explicit policy of Israel's founders. The idea of, quote, a land without a people, unquote, means a land without non-Jewish people. They were to be driven out, starting even before the official founding of Israel in the first Nakba, the Arab Holocaust. 2 Israeli prime ministers were members of the Stern gang of terrorists. They escaped from their British jail and joined to found the State of Israel. Now, I remember Menachem Begin, as coming from the Stern gang of terrorists. Actually, do I remember it's coming from the Stern gang? Actually, I remember Begin coming from the Irgun. Okay, these were terrorists. And I remember Begin as being one of the planners of the bombing of the King David Hotel in 1947. That maybe more than anything else was the thing that decided the Brits, they could no longer hang on to Palestine. But I don't remember Begin being a member of the Irgun. And I'm not sure who Israeli prime ministers he's referring to here. I wish he would have named them. I'm going to have to look up and see uh, take a look at all the prime ministers again and see which ones came from the Stern gang, because usually Pepe is very accurate. Okay, the Stern gangs were the most extreme gangs, okay, of terrorists. One of the Stern gangs, okay, was the Lehigh. That was the main instigator of a slaughter in Tantura, a fishing village, prosperous fishing village. That was it was a Palestinian fishing village. Okay, and in I forget if it was in 47 or 48, but there was a wholesale slaughter of the men from Tantura. Something like 350 men were killed, okay, by Israeli groups. The slaughter was led by the Lehigh, which was one of the Stern gangs. What we're seeing today is the final solution to this plan. It also dovetails into U.S. desires to control the Middle East and its oil reserves. I gotta say, why do we want to control the goddamn oil reserves? We have enough oil here to take care of our own needs while we transit to renewable energy. We don't need the oil reserves of the Middle East. Why is that motivating our foreign policy at all? It is insane. For U.S. diplomacy, the Middle East is, in caps, oil. And ISIS is part of America's Foreign Legion since it was first organized in Afghanistan to fight the Russians. I didn't know ISIS was first organized, okay, in Afghanistan. Okay, I thought that, okay, it was Al Qaeda that was first organized, okay, as part of the Mujahideen, okay, in Afghanistan. But I don't know on what basis he says that ISIS was first organized there. He may just be tracing ISIS back, okay, to the formation, okay, of Al Qaeda. Uh, way back when the Russians were dominating Afghanistan in the 1980s. That is why Israeli policy has been coordinated with the U.S. Israel is the main U.S. client oligarchy in the Middle East. Mossad does most handling of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and wherever else the U.S. may send ISIS terrorists. It's incredible to think and accept, but Pepe is right, that today, to the extent that ISIS exists, it is the U.S.'s Foreign Legion. It is in our employ. It's no longer a militant fundamentalist group in the original sense of that term. It's now just a terrorist group that we are using for our purposes. Anyway, terrorism and even the present genocide is central to U.S. geopolitics. I don't think that's an outrageous claim by Pepe, okay, at all. But as the U.S. learned in the Vietnam War, populations protest and vote against the president who supervises this war. Lyndon Johnson couldn't make a public appearance without crowds chanting. He had to sneak out the side entrance of hotels where he was speaking. To prevent an embarrassment such as Seymour Hersh describing the My Lai massacre, you block journalists from the battlefield. If they are there, you kill them. The Biden-Netanyahu team has targeted journalists in particular. I might have phrased that as the Netanyahu-Biden team, but so the ideal is to kill the population passively to minimize visible bombing, certainly not something the Israelis have done in Gaza. And the line of least resistance is to starve the population. That has been Israeli policy since 2008, unquote. That quote from Michael Hudson here is true. Okay. Israeli policy since 2008 has been to limit the average calories of the Gaza population to something like 1,800 calories a day. So that's a very, very minimalist diet. And since that's the average calories that the Israelis have been allowing into Gaza since that time, then many of Gaza's populations have been getting into the starvation range for many years. They've been probably living on 1,200, 1,400 calories per day. Of course, in the United States, we consider a healthy diet to have 2,400 calories per day. And the next section says, and don't forget to starve them. Professor Hudson makes a direct reference to a Sarah Roy piece in the New York Review of Books, citing a cable from the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv to the Secretary of State on November 3rd, 2008. The cable reads, quote, as part of the overall embargo plan against Gaza, Israeli officials have confirmed to embassy officials on multiple occasions they intend to keep the Gazan economy on the brink of collapse without quite pushing it over the edge, unquote. That has led, according to Professor Hudson, to Israel, quote, destroying fishing boats and greenhouses of Gaza to deprive it from feeding itself. I have to add here that a few days ago, it was found by one of the international organizations that the average calories being supplied to Gazans now, during this siege and destruction of Gaza by the Israelis, the average calorie per day per individual is 245 calories per day. That's what's going on now as Israel starves the population of Gaza, creates an artificial famine.
And the trucks are sitting there with food.
And Bonnie points out the trucks are sitting there with food. They won't be let in. Next, it is joined with the United States, going on with the article. This is still another quote from Michael Hudson. Next, it has joined the United States to block United Nations food aid and that of other countries. The U.S. quickly withdrew from the UN Relief Agency as soon as hostilities began, doing so immediately after the ICJ finding of plausible genocide. It was a major funder of this agency. The hope was that this would set back its activities. Israel simply stopped letting food in. It set up long lines of inspections. That is an excuse to slow the trucks to just 20% of their pre-October 7th rate, from a normal rate of 500 a day to just 112 per day. In addition to blocking trucks, Israel has targeted aid workers about one a day. It's killing one a day, aid workers. The United States sought to avoid being condemned by pretending to build a wharf to unload food by sea. The intention was that by the time the wharf was built, Gaza's population would be starved out, unquote. So that last statement was also for Michael. Next section, Biden and Netanyahu as war criminals. Professor Hudson succinctly draws, so this is Pepe, the key connection in the whole tragedy. Quote, another quote from Michael. The U.S. is trying to blame one person, Netanyahu, but that has been Israeli policy since 1947, and it is U.S. policy. Everything that is occurring since October 2nd, when the Al-Aqsa Mosque was raided by Israeli settlers, leading to Hamas's Al-Aqsa flood retaliation on October 7th. I did not know that this was specifically a retaliation. I knew Hamas's effort was a retaliation for all the years of crap from the Israelis. I did not know that the trigger event was on October 2nd, when Al-Aqsa Mosque was raided by Israeli settlers. That's new to me anyway. All the bombs that have been dropped month after month, as well as blocking United Nations aid. The U.S. aim is to prevent Gaza from having offshore gas rights that would help finance their own prosperity and that of other Islamic groups that the United States views as enemies, and to show the neighboring countries what will be done to them, just as the U.S. has done to Libya just before Gaza. The bottom line is that Biden and his advisors are just as much war criminals as Netanyahu, unquote. Professor Hudson stresses how, quote, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Blinken, and other U.S. officials have said the International Court of Justice ruling of genocide and calling for it to stop is non-binding. then Blinken has just said that no genocide is taking place. The U.S. aim of all this is to end the rule of international law as represented by the UN. It is to be replaced by the U.S., quote, rules-based order, unquote, with no rules published. The intention is to make the U.S. immune to any opposition to its policies based on legal principles of international law or local laws. A totally free hand. Chaos. U.S. diplomats have looked forward and seen that the rest of the world is seeking to withdraw from the U.S. and European NATO orbit. To cope with this irreversible movement, the U.S. is trying to detooth it by wiping away all remaining traces of the international rules that underlay the UN's founding, and indeed the Westphalian principle back in 1648 of non-interference in the affairs of other countries. The actual effect, as usual, is just the opposite of what the U.S. intended. The rest of the world is being forced to create its own new UN, along with a new IMF, a new World Bank, a new International Court at The Hague, and other organizations controlled by the U.S. So the world's protest against the Israeli genocide in Gaza and the West Bank, don't forget the West Bank, is the emotional and moral catalyst to creating a new multipolar geopolitical order for the global majority, unquote. So all that last was a quote from Michael Hudson. Next section is disappear or die. The key question remains, what will happen to Gaza and the Palestinians? Professor Hudson's judgment is ominously realistic. Quote, okay, as Alistair Crook has explained, there now cannot be any two-state solution in Israel. It has to be either all Israeli or all Palestinian. And the way it looks now is all Israeli, the dream from the outset in 1947 of a land without non-Jewish people. Gaza will still be there geographically, along with its gas rights in the Mediterranean, but it will be emptied out and occupied by the Israelis, unquote. On who would, quote, help, unquote, to rebuild Gaza, there are a few solid takers already, and quoting Michael Hudson again, Turkish building companies, Saudi Arabia financing developments, the UAE, American investors, maybe Blackstone. It will be foreign investment. If you look at the fact that the foreign investors of all these countries are looking for what they can get out of the genocide against Palestinians, you realize why there's no opposition to the genocide, unquote, except in the streets, of course, all over the planet. Professor Hudson's final verdict on, quote, the great benefit to the U.S., unquote, is that, quote again, no claims can be brought against the U.S. and against any of the warfare and regime change that it is planning for Iran, China, Russia, and for what has been done in Africa, and Latin America. Israel, Gaza, and West Bank should be seen as an opening of the new Cold War, a plan for basically how to financialize genocide and destruction. Palestinians will either emigrate or be killed. That has been the announced policy for over, a decade. And of course, this was republished from the Strategic Culture Foundation by permission of the author, Pepe Escobar, or his representative. So, those are the origins going all the way back in part to 1948 and before, but in terms of the plan for getting rid of the Palestinians, in Gaza, that is based on thinking that goes back 50 years to the Hudson Institute with Herman Kahn, where Israeli Mossad members were being trained, including Uzi Arad, who became head of the Mossad, today. So Michael is saying this plan comes out of the Mossad, and the Mossad plan comes out of Herman Kahn's thinking, at the Hudson Institute that Michael Hudson, was privy to. So this piece is very important in understanding how this all came about. understanding what the aims of Israel, okay, and the U.S. have been, okay, in Gaza, okay, and why the genocide in Gaza has been as horrific, okay, as it has been, and why it has the characteristics it has, especially the starvation characteristics and the creation of a famine, okay, in Gaza. So, our capability, what I mean by this, our now, I'm talking about the collective West, including NATO, the United States, and Israel. Our capability to do things like this has depended on our strategic deterrence posture, okay, and capability. It's depended upon not only our capabilities for offense, okay, and on nuclear weapons, not only on our air power, okay, and our naval power, but it's also dependent on our anti-ballistic missile capability. We now see our anti-ballistic missile capability and the superiority of that capability is now gone. So a great foundation for our ability to do the kinds of terrible things we've been doing in foreign policy is now kaput. The big question, how will we react at this point? There doesn't seem to be agreement between the United States, okay, and Israel right now. Okay, the United States seems to want to back off a little, not mix with Iran, okay, anymore. But we don't know what Netanyahu is going to decide, okay, with respect to Israel. Now, there were live streams today. There was one of coming from Dialogue Works, which is the live stream of Nima Alkershid. Today, he was talking to Larry Wilkerson, of course, the wonderful analyst of foreign policy who used to be the special assistant to Colin Powell when he was Secretary of State. And of course, Colonel Wilkerson spent considerable time in this live stream talking about the way Netanyahu thinks, talking about the Masada complex that many Israelis have had, okay, over the years. The Masada complex is the idea that we would rather die, okay, than give in. And of course, the observation from Larry Wilkerson and Scott Ritter, Colonel McGregor, okay, and most other observers, Alistair Crook, many observers of the current situation, is that Israel is losing the war, okay, in Gaza. It's being confronted by Hezbollah, okay, in the north, who did damage to Israel today. It's being confronted by the axis of resistance, okay, led actually by Iran, and the increasing power of that axis over time is facing Israel not only with a strategic defeat, but with a defeat that would involve either the non-existence of the Israeli state, or maybe to a lesser degree, finally, a change in the local situation so that we have a solution which is two-state, okay, solution. Yes, I know Michael says two states are impossible right now, but they're not impossible if the 750,000 settlers are driven away from Palestine, or if they're driven back to the Israeli partition of Palestine, then two states would no longer be impossible. Yes, they're impossible now, but boy, those Iranian missiles can do an awful lot if they're deployed. We don't know if Iran is going to deploy them again. But if Netanyahu goes forward and decides, on a devastating retaliation towards Iran, actually striking their territory this time. Okay. Iran has guaranteed, they have stated explicitly, that as soon as that Israeli attack is detected by Iran, which is going to be almost immediately because they have the Russian Chinese satellite capabilities in back of them, then the Iranian missiles will begin to fly in response, and far more severe than this 350 object attack. So, if that happens, they won't just be restricted to military targets. If Iran fires 35,000 missiles, a lot of those missiles are going to be directed at civilian areas and the West Bank occupation. The settler occupation of the West Bank will undoubtedly be struck by those Iranian missiles. It remains to be seen, once that starts, how many of the West Bank settlers will remain. A considerable number of them have already begun to leave. There's been a rumor circulating that maybe 3 to 4 million of the Israelis, or the settlers, in the West Bank, have already gone home. And perhaps, the Jewish population of Palestine on the whole is down to 3 or 4 million from 7 million already. But what happens when the missiles start to fall on the civilian areas of Israel?
Who's going to hold on to
and the settler areas, of the West Bank? What's going to happen then, I wonder? Bonnie, you were saying?
Who's going to hold on to the total nuclear weapons they had?
Well, no doubt some of these missiles will be directed, at the Dimona area. And depending on how the Israelis see things, the retaliation that may be coming up, in spite of the U.S.'s telling Israel, don't you dare, Netanyahu has already verbally asserted the independence of Israel and saying, basically, we will do what we decide, we will do what we like. Now, they've hesitated, the Israelis have hesitated, but if they retaliate, there is a possibility they'll retaliate with some of their nuclear warheads to begin with, rather than accept the fact that Iran has now established strategic deterrence with their missiles. Now Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons to retaliate with, but given that Israel is so small, their missile capability is enough to devastate the whole of Israel without, the radiation. So, at that point, how many people are going to remain, in Israel? It may be a lot of Iran will be devastated at this point. But Iran's a big country. It will probably survive. But will Israel survive? Devastating missile attacks, on its populated areas. These are the calculations the Israeli planners have to be making, at this point. There's one problem here. The Israeli planners who have a Masada complex may decide that even though Iran, in terms of rational people, has established their strategic deterrence, still the Israelis cannot accept a defeat of this kind, and therefore they're going to use their nuclear weapons, even if they think their nuclear weapons won't suffice to prevent the destruction of Israel. They may be determined simply to take others with them and to use their nuclear capability to do that. I don't think anybody knows how this is going to turn out at this point. The whole situation is extremely worrisome until Netanyahu makes a decision, or until Netanyahu is replaced by saner people. Now, there are people in his war cabinet. All the people in his war cabinet are very anti-Palestinian. They all view them as human animals, evidently. They all were all in for this genocide. There's no question about that. But they may not all be in for the Masada complex and for the destruction of Israel. Some of them may realize that they're at a military disadvantage, okay, at this point, and that they have to retrench, and that they may have to allow, okay, a Palestinian state. And those people may decide they're going to depose Netanyahu and not to accept uh, his order for what essentially would be the Armageddon, okay, of Israel. Well, I didn't mean to go on so fulsomely for so long. I want to go be part of D stream now, but I thought this was a very important stream here. April says, "Hi, Joe. I'm lurking on Facebook. I just realized you can watch on mute because there's captions. Works well for me with baby sleeping." April says from Facebook, "Sorry, so late as you can guess, they took their time falling asleep tonight." As I can guess, April. Yes. But thank you for coming. I'm glad you were able to attend on Facebook. If not, okay, on YouTube. There have been very few comments about this. I thought there would have been a lot of them because from my point of view, this was a hell of a stream, but unfortunately not so. Anyway, I am going to leave since yours are the last two comments, and I'll be going over to D stream, okay, at this point. So, have a good night. I'll be back tomorrow, by the way, with another foreign policy program. It turns out there's a lot of foreign policy programs to attend to. Just to give you coming attractions, I'll be going over tomorrow the geopolitics. This is actually a post by Michael Hudson, very, very long. It will take a long time to go through. It's a transcription of a stream that he did, okay, with Radica Desai. And the name of it is How the U.S. is Waging Economic War on China. It's of extreme importance. And we're going to go through the transcript. We're not going to play the whole stream. The transcript is very long. It's 9,100 words. So tomorrow's program is going to be a long program, certainly. But it's an essential program because it goes through the dimensions of the economic war the U.S. is fighting against China now. It's very important to understand, okay, the economic war. And we'll get the perspective of Radica Desai here too, as well as Michael Hudson. Okay, and Radica Desai, along with Michael Hudson, is one of the world's premier geopolitics, and geoeconomics thinkers. So you'll be getting 2 for 1 here tomorrow. And it's going to be a hell of a night. So I urge you all to come and to share, like, share, and subscribe, inform others of what's going to be going on tomorrow night. Right now, though, I will be going over to D's stream, and I encourage you all to come over there too. I'm sure it's going to be very good, okay, tonight. So I will stop sharing here and we'll end this stream.